Good afternoon, everyone. I want to provide some additional details for the officer-involved shooting that occurred on February 21st at the Hampton Inn near Tudor and C Street. Before I begin with the details or the updates on that officer-involved shooting, I want to provide a little context of the patrol officers that were there, and then when we call out our Special Weapons and Tactics team, which we refer to as SWAT. For those folks that don't know, our SWAT team is a group of officers that have additional training. They train approximately 3 days a month, and then they have another 40-hour training throughout the course of the year. They've got certain tactics and tools that are available to them that are not available to the rest of the police force. Generally, when the SWAT team is called out, crisis negotiators come out with them, or generally they come out even before. And then they also just have tools that in a support team for those particular tools, and some of those things include drones and equipment that they're able to hear things better, so that if they do have situations like this and something's going on inside of a room or a hotel room, they're able to try to hear and or see what's going on. So that's what the team looks like. Patrol officers responded to a call for service at 3:45 in the morning, and that call for service was that a suspicious vehicle was in the parking lot of the hotel, and that 2 male occupants left. The vehicle was involved in an looting earlier in the night from the Anchorage Police Department. When officers arrived on scene, they started an investigation over about the next 23 minutes that included contacting one of the males in the lobby and determining that the second male went into a hotel room. They made contact with the occupants of that hotel room, and during that 23-minute time period, they determined that there were several children inside that room. There was an adult female inside the room, an adult male inside the room, and then the subject that's involved in the officer-involved shooting. While the officers are communicating with the adult male and the adult female in the room, they are doing it through a small open door. So the door wasn't fully open, and the adult male and adult female, one at a time, would talk to the officers standing in a very narrow open. So the officers weren't able to see what was happening inside of the room. At one point in time, the adult female steps out, and she has a very conversation where she's talking very low, and she indicates non-verbally that there is the subject inside the room and that he has a gun. She then goes back inside the room. The adult male comes outside of the room, where he's standing physically outside of the door, and he also confirms that information that the officers believe they got from the female, and he indicates that the subject left inside the room that later will become involved in the officer-involved shooting is in the area of the kids. And then we usher him out, and the officers on scene make the determination that that this is escalated to the point where now we have an individual in the room. We have some kids that potentially are not able to leave, probably the adult female as well. They push open the door and start calling for the male to come out. The male appears and points a handgun at the officers. In the background of the room, as you can imagine, is chaos and a lot of movement with the children and the mother. And then the subject slams the door shut. The officers then proceed to continue to try to gain information on who this person is, get more resources there, and at approximately 4:11 in the morning, while they are standing outside of the room, they hear a shot being fired from inside the room. Those officers then attempt to make entry inside of the room. While they're trying to make entry into the room, 2 shots are fired through the door at the same time. At that point in time, they back away from the door since they weren't able to gain entry, and we initiate a SWAT call out with the information that we have that's available at that particular time. During the course of this call, there's silence and quiet in the room. Then there's some yelling in the room, and it kind of goes back and forth, and the officers are trying to dictate and understand what's happening in the room. When SWAT arrives on scene and crisis negotiators arrive on scene, they too start gathering information. They do have contact with the occupants in the room intermittently, so we know there are periods of time, although there's escalation, that there's no reason to force entry during certain times. We gain enough information throughout the course of the call to indicate that there is a significant threat level for the occupants of the room, and just before the officers make entry, they can hear and have indication that now there's an assault between the subject and the female. What you'll see in the video when the video is released is that the officers and SWAT team initiates an explosive breach to get inside the room. That's only partially successful. They have to physically force their way in. When the officers enter the room, the primary officer mentions or yells at the suspect to drop the gun twice, and then he says, "Don't do it." The way the orientation of the room is when you walk in, there are two beds off to the left. In between the two beds is a floating table, so you can put things underneath the table. Between the two beds is the subject. He's laying on the ground, and he has the adult female on top of him, and he's holding her on top of him, and he has a gun that is pointed at her. So when the officers see the gun, and they yell to drop the gun twice and don't do it, one officer steps up on that first bed and fires one round. He fired one round with a handgun. The second officer fires one round from a rifle, and the subject was pronounced deceased on scene. This case will fall under that 45-day rule of releasing video cameras, so we will release this. I do want to mention, though, when it comes to the video release, that we've had a little bit of time where we've had this policy and we've seen video release. And I think that, as we've mentioned throughout the course of the last 6 or 7 months, we're going to constantly evaluate what that policy looks like and how we're releasing videos and the information that's coming out in the video. And I think we're at that point where, as a community, I think we start discussing on if we're happy with the information that's put out, the impact that it has on the family and friends and officers and just the general community, and whether or not we want to modify what we're doing in any way. So I think we should expect that conversation to start to pick up in the next couple of weeks, because I think we owe it to everybody to reevaluate like we said we would in the beginning. And with that, we'll take questions. Yes, Wesley.
So last week when you had the press conference, you indicated that this subject who had been shot by officers, there was another person with him in the vehicle when he pulled up. Is that still the case that you understand? And is there any indication that second person was involved at all with the hostage situation?
They were not involved, no.
I have several questions, but just immediately, can you explain the logistics of sort of how this person was shot? There were children in the room also, and then officers got up on a bed and were able to just shoot him. Can you give us a little more detail how that happened?
I mean, you'll see the video. I think it was difficult, and that's part of the training that these officers go through, is to immediately place themselves in a situation where it's a position where they're at disadvantage, and there's a lot of things that they have to consider. And that's why when in the first press conference when I talked about this, these types of situations are extremely rare, where our team has to enter into a room and do a hostage rescue, and the level of volatility and danger when they go into rooms like this, giving that their window of opportunity is extremely small. Otherwise, other people can get injured.
What was the relationship of all these people? Can you tell us that?
I'm not going to get into the relationship of the folks in the room. Yes, Wesley.
So I'm curious. This is we've been reviewing the shootings in the past sort of 12 months. This is the third instance where an officer has shot a person a second time. There were 3 officers, and I'm curious, from an optics standpoint, if you're concerned about that. This is ostensibly a pretty rare incident when an officer shoots somebody, and there have been 3 officers who've done it twice in the last year. And then also, I'm curious, just sort of the sort of mental health and sort of stress impact that puts on officers. If you're concerned that there are 3 officers who've shot someone twice in the last year.
Yeah, there's a lot of concerns when we have just the officer-involved shootings, the numbers we have in general, and then when we narrow it down to the particular officers that have been involved, there's always a concern when they're involved in multiple officer-involved shootings. The mental health aspect of it is probably at the top of the list. We go through a process after they're involved in officer-involved shootings to ensure that they're able to go out to the street and perform their duties. So we make sure that they're duty ready. But even when they're duty ready, there's still residual, mental health issues that we're always concerned about. And so we've kind of created a system within the police department that we're, constantly monitoring, taking care of them, taking care of their family, But I think we see kind of the similar concerns in the entire community as a whole, and we see kind of that pressure and that stress throughout Anchorage right now.
And I guess you're concerned about the optics of the fact that there have been 3 officers who shot 2 people in the last year?
Well, I certainly understand that the optics are not great and that people are concerned about that, but when you look at and you consider the calls for service that we're going to, and you consider the facts and circumstances of each case, the facts, speak for themselves and are relatively clear. So, although I can understand the optics, the facts say that we have reasons to be there. We're doing the things that we need to do to try to reduce these officer-involved shootings.
At this point, have you been able to identify the man who's killed?
We have, but we have not released the name. I don't believe yet.
Will that happen soon?
I believe it will happen soon, yes. I won't give you an exact date. We'll follow up on you when we're going to do that.
Can I just clarify one thing, because I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. When you get making reference to the room with the children and the suspects, were the officers in the hallway the whole time, or were they in a room outside that room?
Officers were occupying the entire area, the hallway to include. So
They were in the hallway.
Yeah, we had close.
When the door was slammed, they weren't in the.
Correct. That is correct. Yes.
And then I know that the timeline was about 5 hours between when officers showed up and then the man was ultimately shot. And it sounds like you had said that officers heard a shot fired in the hotel room. They kind of respond to it, to the door, and then 2 more bullets were fired towards officers.
Correct.
And that was in like that first initial time, and then hours had passed before they breached?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
We have time for one more question.
And I guess, the indication was that an assault had happened, and that's what led officers to go in. I guess, was the man firing a shot in the hotel room, did that not necessarily justify officers sort of breaching the door? I'm curious what the sort of calculus is there.
Yeah, when I mentioned that there were things that occurred in the room throughout the course of the call that raised to the level that we could have used deadly force or certainly entered the room, that had occurred. And, when you're in these hostage situations, it's a very delicate balance between forcing your way inside the room and putting the people at risk and calming the situation. And that's where crisis negotiators come in. And so they attempted to make entry into the room when that one shot was fired. And then when 2 rounds came through the door, they immediately backed away from the door, but then started kind of that process and that cycle again to try to get everything calmed down. Plus, they were also having difficulties getting through that door as well. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it just sounds like there was kind of a balance between, I think, from a policy standpoint, officers probably would have been justified in going in, hearing the shot go off, but I imagine they were balancing the fact that they couldn't see in, that there were children, there were kind of other things that didn't sort of lead them to immediately take that step.
Yeah, these types of calls are almost impossible, and that, is it time to go in, is it not time to go in, is it time to push, time to back off, is constantly being evaluated. And it, within a second, it can be a wrong move. And so that's why, when the officers finally did make entry, what took place when they walked through that door and took immediate action, it's just, it's a heroic thing and it's in a horrible circumstance at the same time. So, all right, thank you.